In a war-torn galaxy, Mira, the key to an ancient royal weapon, has spent her life running from a machine that should protect her, but hunts her instead. Betrayed by an ally she trusted and fighting her own bloodline's legacy, she finally has a chance to break free if she survives what's hunting her now. But when the one who saved her turns out to be the monster's creator, she realizes that freedom may come at an unimaginable cost. The wind howled like a feral beast, its roar cutting through the barren expanse of Erythia Prime. The icy planet seemed to reject all warmth at its surface, an endless sea of jagged rock and frozen wasteland. The storm arrived without warning, descending on the landscape like an uninvited specter, tearing across the sky with savage fury. Snow whipped through the air in thick, blinding sheets, stinging skin like sharp needles. The world was swallowed by a dense white fog, a frozen chaos that blurred everything in its path. Jonas, a human from Earth, had been traveling alone, a habit he had come to embrace since the war ended. A former soldier in the Earth Alliance, he had seen too much of the galaxy's cruelty and brutality. The battles he fought felt like distant memories now, as did the faces of those he had lost. He had sought refuge on Erythia Prime, drawn to its emptiness, its silence. It was a harsh world abandoned long ago by its own people, but in its desolation Jonas found a kind of peace. At least that was what he had convinced himself. The cold and the isolation were familiar, a means to escape the shadows of his past. He had been setting up camp when the storm struck. His movements were practiced, the result of years spent surviving in hostile environments. Jonas secured the canvas of his shelter against the onslaught of wind, tightening the ropes that held it in place. His breath came in sharp, foggy bursts as he worked, and the cold seemed to seep into his bones, making each movement a challenge. Still, he didn't mind. The storm was a reminder of the harsh realities of the universe. It was something he could control. The war, his past, those were things he couldn't. As he worked, the wind carried something with it. A faint sound barely audible over the roar of the storm. At first he thought it was just the wind, a trick of the harsh environment. But then it came again, a cry. A human-like sound, but distorted and faint, as though it were struggling to survive against the wind's fury. Jonas's body froze, instinct kicking in. His hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his back, but he knew it wasn't an enemy. It couldn't be. He scanned the whiteout, his eyes narrowing. There was movement, a flash of something through the swirling snow. His heart rate quickened. There was no telling what kind of creature Erythia's wilderness had spawned, but this was something else. Something was out there, and it needed help. Jonas didn't hesitate. He ran, pushing through the knee-deep snow with determination. The wind was merciless, cutting through his jacket and stinging his skin, but his focus remained fixed on the figure ahead. The cry came again, louder this time. It was definitely human or something close to it. Through the storm he saw her, a figure stumbling through the blizzard, her movements slow and erratic, as if the storm itself were pushing her toward the edge of consciousness. She was small, with a frail, alien appearance. Her clothes were tattered and mismatched, entirely unsuited for the brutal cold. A thin trail of blood stained the snow beneath her feet, marking her path like a warning. Jonas's pulse quickened. A part of him questioned what he was doing, what a lone human soldier was getting into by helping someone in such a dire state. He was no hero. He'd never been one. He was just a man looking for peace. But at this moment, there was no time to question. The woman, this stranger, was in trouble. "Hey!" Jonas shouted over the wind, his voice cutting through the maelstrom, but it was drowned out by the roar of the storm. She didn't respond, her eyes vacant, lost in the haze of exhaustion and whatever injury she had sustained. Jonas reached her in a few swift strides, catching her just before she crumpled to the ground. She was lighter than he expected, almost too light, and her skin pale, a strange shade of icy blue, felt fragile against his gloved hands. Her body trembled violently in his arms and her eyes fluttered open, barely focusing on him. "Can you hear me?" Jonas said, his voice rough, barely audible through the wind. He shook her gently, trying to rouse her from the fog of unconsciousness. For a moment there was nothing. Then her lips parted and she mumbled something in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was weak, hoarse, barely more than a breath. Jonas cursed under his breath, lifting her higher, his muscles straining with the effort. He couldn't leave her here, not in this storm. The weight of her body in his arms made every step feel heavier, but he pressed on, determined to get her to shelter. With great effort, he managed to carry her back to his camp. His boots crunched in the snow with every step, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but the shelter was within sight now. The canvas of his tent flapped violently in the wind, but it stood firm, a small oasis in the middle of the storm's fury. Once inside, Jonas laid her down on the bedroll he had made from whatever materials he could scavenge. She was unconscious again, her skin still unnaturally cold to the touch, but at least she wasn't in immediate danger of dying from exposure. He quickly built up the fire, the crackling of the flames, a comforting contrast to the chaos outside. Jonas sat beside her, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of injury. She had a series of small cuts, likely from the storm, and there was blood dried around her lips and under her nose. Her clothing, torn and tattered, seemed barely adequate for the conditions she had endured. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her here, Jonas didn't know, but he had a feeling he was going to find out. Her eyes fluttered open again, though still unfocused. Jonas could see the struggle in them, the confusion. It was as if she was trying to remember who she was, why she was here. "I'm Jonas," he said softly, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond, but her breathing seemed to steady just a little. Jonas sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. This was nothing like the wars he'd fought, nothing like the battles that had defined his life for so long. He had never imagined he would be here alone with a strange alien woman in a place so far removed from Earth that it felt like a dream or a nightmare. But there was something about her, something in her eyes that told him this wasn't just another encounter. This wasn't random. She was here for a reason. Jonas couldn't explain why he felt this way, but he knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The storm outside Erythia Prime's icy surface raged on its fury, unrelenting, as Jonas sat by the fire, watching over the strange alien woman who lay unconscious in his shelter. Her presence, despite her fragility, was a reminder that he was no longer the solitary figure he had once been. She was an enigma, someone who by all rights should not have been here, and yet fate had led her to him in the midst of the storm. For the first time in a long while, Jonas felt something stir deep inside him, something that he thought had died in the heat of the war hope. He sat in the dim light, leaning back against the cold stone wall of the shelter. The warmth of the fire crackled, but it did little to melt the iciness in his heart. He didn't know why he had decided to help her. His instincts had kicked in when he saw her stumbling through the storm, but that was nothing new. He had been trained to respond, trained to save lives if he could. But this felt different. Something about her wasn't right. There was a certain intensity to her, something hidden beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. But for now, there was little time for questions and even less time for answers. They were safe for now, and that was all that mattered. It wasn't until the stillness of the night began to settle that Jonas heard a faint rustling sound coming from outside the shelter. His senses immediately went on high alert. He had learned long ago that silence was as dangerous as noise. A soft scrape against the outer canvas of the shelter. Then another, and another. Jonas' hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side, his breath steady but quickening as he carefully rose from his place by the fire. He moved silently, his mind running through every possible scenario. Whoever or whatever was outside, it wasn't natural, and it certainly wasn't friendly. The wind howled again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the usual storm that Jonas had grown accustomed to. It was almost as if the storm itself had turned into a hunter, a predator circling its prey. His eyes flicked to the woman lying still on the bedroll. She remained unconscious, but he couldn't risk leaving her vulnerable. Jonas quietly crouched beside her, his fingers grazing the coolness of her skin. His heart thudded in his chest as he quickly assessed the situation. There was no escape. They were trapped in the shelter with nowhere to run but into the snowstorm. But that would be suicide. The only option was to prepare for what was coming. The rustling outside grew louder, more pronounced, as if a shadow was closing in. Jonas stood up, his movements fluid and practiced. He reached for the rifle by the corner of the shelter, checking its power pack and ensuring the safety was off. He had fought many battles, but none like this, none where the enemy was unknown and unseen. The unfamiliarity of the situation gnawed at him. He was no stranger to being hunted, but this was different. A sharp mechanical screech cut through the howling wind, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots crunching through the snow. Jonas narrowed his eyes. He had heard that sound before he had heard it in the darkest corners of the galaxy in the moments before an ambush. Royal hunters. They had come for her. Without thinking, Jonas grabbed the woman's limp form, lifting her up with a strength he didn't know he had. He moved quickly, silently dragging her toward the back of the shelter, where a small alcove offered some degree of concealment. He didn't know how long they had, but it wasn't long enough. The hunters were closing in, and Jonas could hear their voices now, cold, mechanical, and relentless. "We have her scent," one of them said, in a voice that sounded like it came from a machine, modulated and emotionless. "She cannot escape." Jonas cursed under his breath. He had hoped he would be able to outlast the storm, but it was clear now that the storm was the least of his problems. The hunters had tracked them. They had found them. The woman groaned softly in his arms, her eyelids fluttering as she began to regain consciousness. Jonas paused, his heart racing. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently, pressing her gently against the wall of the shelter. He could feel her trembling in his grip, but there was no time to comfort her now. The moment for action had come. Jonas scanned the area, his mind calculating the best course of action. The shelter was too exposed. The snowstorm outside provided some cover, but not enough. The hunters were close. He could hear them speaking in low, clipped tones just outside, and their movements were deliberate, coordinated, as if they had done this many times before. Jonas knew they were highly trained soldiers of the royal family, and they had been hunting this woman for reasons he couldn't yet understand. He had seen their type before: ruthless, cold, efficient. They had no mercy, no hesitation. Their only mission was to capture or eliminate the target, and now that target was in his care. Suddenly, a loud crash shook the shelter. The canvas door flung open with violent force, and a figure silhouetted against the storm's fury stepped inside. A massive figure clad in armor that gleamed like silver under the harsh light of the storm. Jonas didn't hesitate. He fired first, the blast of the rifle filling the small space with a deafening roar. The hunter staggered back, surprised by the immediate retaliation. Jonas wasn't sure if he had hit his mark, but he didn't wait to find out. He fired again and again, each shot landing with deadly precision. But the hunter was faster. A shimmering shield snapped into place around the figure, deflecting the blasts. The second hunter appeared in the doorway, flanking Jonas, and a third emerged from the shadows behind him. They had surrounded him. Jonas gritted his teeth, his pulse quickening as he assessed his dwindling options. He couldn't afford to miss. He couldn't afford to fail. The woman in his arms stirred her eyes, focusing slowly on the chaotic scene unfolding around her. Fear washed over her face, and she struggled weakly against Jonas's grip. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. "They'll kill you." Jonas held her tighter. "Not if I can help it." But it was becoming clear that there would be no easy escape. The hunters moved with a deadly fluidity, their advanced weapons aimed at Jonas, ready to strike. Jonas kept his back to the wall, his rifle trained on the hunters, but he knew this wouldn't last much longer. He had to make a choice: fight or die trying. The hunter in front of him raised a weapon, its barrel glowing with a faint, menacing light. Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the woman, this strange, mysterious alien, let out a shout. A strange, eerie sound that seemed to ripple through the air. The hunters froze, their eyes locking onto her. For a moment, everything was still. Then, as if summoned by her voice, the guardian mechanism, the ancient royal protector, activated its massive form, emerging from the depths of the storm. A mechanical monstrosity built to protect the royal family, it stood at least 3 meters tall, its body encased in gleaming metal. Its red eyes locked onto the woman as it advanced toward her. Jonas's heart sank. The hunters were no longer the greatest threat. The guardian mechanism was here, and it would not stop until it had completed its mission to protect the royal bloodline by eliminating any threats. And in that moment, Jonas realized he had just entered a battle he could never win. The blast of cold air from the storm that raged outside seemed to intensify as the massive form of the guardian mechanism towered over the small shelter. Its red eyes glowed ominously, scanning the room with unyielding precision. Jonas could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he kept his weapon trained on the machine, the grip of his rifle cold and unyielding in his hands. The hunters, once the most dangerous threat, had now stepped aside, momentarily paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of the Jonas's eyes shifted to the woman who stood beside him, now fully awake and staring at the looming figure. Her expression was one of fear and resignation, but beneath that was something deeper, a flicker of recognition, a shudder. It was as if she had been here before, confronted by this monster, and she knew what was coming. "You have to run," she whispered, her voice shaking as she turned her gaze to Jonas. "You can't stop it." Jonas's mind raced. There was no escape now. The storm outside had sealed off any chance of fleeing, and the Guardian with its towering form and menacing presence was not something Jonas could fight with mere firearms. The machine was too powerful, too well-armored. It had been built for one purpose: to protect by any means necessary, but Jonas refused to give up. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger, something deeper. He wouldn't leave her to face this alone. The Guardian took a step forward, its massive metal feet crushing the frozen snow beneath it as it advanced into the shelter. Each movement was deliberate, mechanical, and terrifying. Jonas felt the weight of the situation pressed down on him, his fingers trembling around the rifle. He'd fought in wars before, faced impossible odds, but this was different. This was not just a fight against a physical enemy. It was a fight against something that had no human empathy, no desire to understand. It was a machine. Jonas turned to the woman, his voice low, steady. "What is this thing? Why is it after you?" Her face paled further, and her eyes dropped to the floor. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her shoulders slumped as she spoke, the weight of her confession apparent in her tone. "It's the Guardian mechanism," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "an ancient construct created by my people to protect the royal bloodline. It recognizes me because of my genetic code." Jonas blinked, trying to comprehend her words as he looked at the machine, which was now slowly encircling them, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Your genetic code?" he asked, his mind trying to make sense of her cryptic explanation. I'm part of a royal program," she said, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and sorrow. "My people created the Auto Guardians machines like this one. They embedded a special genetic code in my blood that activates the Guardian whenever I am near. It's meant to protect the royal line, to make sure no one can hurt us. But what they didn't realize was that this same code makes me a target for the Guardian. It sees me as a threat, an anomaly to be erased." Jonas could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke, the weight of guilt pressing down on her every word. The storm outside had nothing on the storm brewing inside her. She had been born into a world that had turned against her, a world that saw her as a tool to be used and discarded. Now her very existence was triggering a battle between life and death. Her confession hit Jonas like a gut punch. She wasn't just some innocent bystander in this war. She was a key player in a game that was much bigger than she could ever have imagined. The Guardian wasn't after her out of malice. It was doing exactly what it was programmed to do: protect the royal bloodline. But in doing so, it had become a mindless, relentless force of destruction, targeting the very person it was meant to protect. A loud mechanical whir interrupted Jonas's thoughts as the Guardian moved closer, its towering form now just feet away. The woman recoiled instinctively, but Jonas stood firm, his rifle still aimed at the machine. The air in the shelter was thick with tension, each second dragging on like an eternity. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. "Mira," Jonas said, his voice tight with determination, "we need to fight back. I don't care what this thing is or how powerful it is. We're not going down without a fight." Mira's eyes widened as she stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "You can't fight it," she said, her voice breaking. "No one can. This thing is designed to never fail. It will not stop until I'm dead, or it has completed its mission." Jonas set his jaw, his grip tightening on the rifle. He knew she was right. This wasn't a fight they could win with brute force alone. But there had to be something, some weakness in the Guardian's design, some way to disable it. "You said it recognizes your genetic code." Jonas said, his mind working at a rapid pace. "If we can find a way to stop it from recognizing you, maybe we can buy ourselves some time." Mira hesitated, clearly torn between the fear of the machine and the hope that Jonas was offering. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted. But Jonas could see the spark of something else behind her fear, a flicker of trust. "I don't know if that will work," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But if we're going to die here, I'd rather die trying." Jonas nodded, determination setting in. Then let's make sure we don't go down without a fight. His eyes scanned the shelter, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon or distraction. His gaze flicked to the small pile of supplies he had gathered, then to the corner of the shelter where an old power generator sat, its blinking lights barely visible in the dim light of the fire. He had an idea. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to try something. I need you to stay low and keep out of its line of sight. If I'm wrong, we won't get another chance." Mira nodded, her face set in grim determination. She crouched low, moving silently to the far side of the shelter as Jonas moved quickly to the generator. With the Guardian now only a few feet away, its sensors scanning the room, Jonas worked quickly, ripping the cover off the generator and exposing its inner workings. He was no engineer, but he had seen enough of these devices in his time as a soldier to know that if you could mess with the power supply, you could create a malfunction. His fingers moved with precision as he yanked out a few wires and began to rewire them in a hasty attempt to create a feedback loop. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. The air seemed to vibrate with the hum of the Guardian's movements as it approached Mira, its mechanical eyes locking onto her with cold precision. Jonas could hear the soft whir of its targeting system, the final preparation before it made its move. Now Jonas shouted, the desperation in his voice cutting through the tension. In that instant, he pulled the last wire free. The generator sputtered and the lights inside flickered violently. A loud crackling noise filled the shelter as a surge of electrical power shot through the wiring, causing the Guardian to stagger back, its systems briefly overloaded. Mira gasped as she dropped to the ground, narrowly. The blast from Jonas's rifle echoed through the small shelter, its sound nearly swallowed by the howling winds outside. But the Guardian, though momentarily stunned by the electrical surge, was far from defeated. Its mechanical body jerked with unnatural speed, and its glowing red eyes flickered as it recalibrated, resetting its systems with an unsettling precision. Jonas cursed under his breath. He had hoped the makeshift trap would buy them more time, but now it was clear they were out of time. The Guardian's sensors were online again, its targeting system locking onto Mira as it began to move toward her with relentless purpose. Mira, still crouched low to the ground, looked up at the Guardian with a mixture of terror and resignation. Her body trembled, but it was not just the cold. She knew what this machine was capable of. She had been its target for as long as she could remember, and she had been running from it, running from her own past for years. "Mira," Jonas shouted, urgency bleeding into his voice. "Get back, move!" But she didn't respond. Her gaze locked on the Guardian as if she were paralyzed by the sight of it. She had seen it before. She had lived through the nightmare that was the Guardian's hunt, and now she was about to relive it. Jonas didn't have time to contemplate her silence. He grabbed her arm, roughly pulling her toward the back of the shelter, forcing her to move despite her hesitation. The Guardian's mechanical limbs clanked against the floor as it advanced, its movements precise and calculating. Jonas could feel the weight of the machine's presence in the air, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to fill the room with an ominous energy. The machine's purpose was clear: eliminate the threat, and that threat was Mira. Jonas knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had already made his decision, even if it meant risking his life to protect someone he barely knew. He had to fight, even if the odds were stacked against him. But the reality of the situation set in quickly. The Guardian wasn't a typical enemy. It was an ancient construct built with technology far beyond anything Jonas had seen. His rifle would do little against its reinforced armor, and every shot he fired seemed to have little effect. His eyes darted to the entrance of the shelter, where the snowstorm raged just outside. There was no way out, not through the storm, not through the machine. He could already hear the low mechanical hum of the Guardian's weapon systems locking onto its target. It wouldn't be long before it fired. Without hesitation, Jonas pulled Mira into the far corner of the shelter, behind a stack of debris. He placed himself between her and the Guardian, his heart pounding in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to run. But he wouldn't run. Not while she was here. Not while they were both being hunted. "You have to go," Mira finally whispered, her voice weak but resolute. Her hands gripped Jonas's arm, her eyes pleading. "You can't win this. It will never stop coming for me. I'm the reason it's here. You don't have to." Mira stopped Jonas, cut her off, his voice firm, though the fear gnawed at him. He could feel her desperation, but it wasn't just hers. It was his too. He didn't know how they could survive this. He didn't know how to fight something like the Guardian, but there was no other choice. "I'm not leaving you." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but no words came. She just stared at him, and in that moment Jonas saw the full weight of what she was carrying. The burden of being hunted. The guilt of being someone so powerful and yet so helpless. But there was no time for pity, no time for hesitation. The Guardian had reached them. Its massive form loomed in the doorway, filling the small shelter with its intimidating presence. It raised its weapon, a sleek metallic arm extending toward them. The air crackled with an electric charge and Jonas braced himself, tightening his grip on his rifle. The energy in the room was suffocating. He could hear Mira's breath quickening beside him, the sound of her fear cutting through the tense silence. And then, as if to confirm the truth, they both feared the Guardian's arm flashed forward, releasing a bolt of energy that tore through the air with deafening force. Jonas's heart lurched as he pushed Mira to the ground, throwing himself on top of her as the blast surged past them, grazing the wall of the shelter. The force of the impact sent debris flying, and for a split second Jonas thought they were done for. The shelter trembled with the force of the blast, but Jonas could feel that they had been spared, at least for the moment. His mind raced as he realized what had happened. The Guardian wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to force them into a corner. It was trying to break them. Mira's hands trembled beneath him as Jonas rose, his eyes darting toward the wreckage of the shelter. The Guardian was reloading its weapon, but Jonas knew they couldn't afford another direct hit. His mind raced and an idea formed, though it felt like a long shot. They needed a distraction, a way to buy them more time to break the Guardian's targeting system. "Stay down," Jonas muttered, his voice tight as he turned to Mira. "I'm going to try something." She nodded without a word, her face pale and drawn as she pressed herself against the ground, trying to make herself as small as possible. Jonas moved quickly, darting across the shelter to a pile of metal scraps and tools he had scavenged from the wreckage of the outpost. He grabbed a few items at random, not bothering to consider whether they would work. The only thing he knew for sure was that he didn't have much time before the Guardian reset. Jonas turned back to the machine, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The Guardian was still recharging its weapon, its red eyes scanning the room. Jonas took a deep breath and began to work. The idea was simple but risky. He was going to overload the Guardian's sensors, send a surge of electrical interference straight into its systems. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. With a grunt, Jonas shoved a metal rod into the shelter's power grid, rigging it as quickly as he could. He didn't have the luxury of precision. Every second counted. The Guardian's weapon charged again, and Jonas knew that this would be their only chance. If he failed, they would both die. If he succeeded, they might have a shot. Now Jonas muttered under his breath, his hands trembling as he connected the final wire. The power surged. A crackling jolt of energy shot through the air, and for a split second the world seemed to freeze. Then the Guardian staggered back. Jonas's heart raced as the machine stumbled, its weapon systems flickering and malfunctioning. The Guardian was now disoriented, its sensors overloaded by the surge. It paused, trying to recalibrate, but the delay was enough. Now Jonas shouted to Mira, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the back of the shelter. They had to move. They had to get out before the Guardian recovered. They ran the chaos of the storm outside, roaring as they pushed through the blinding white haze, their breaths coming fast and hard as they navigated the treacherous landscape. The Guardian, still recovering, was far behind them, but Jonas knew it wouldn't be for long. It would catch up. It always did. As they reached the edge of the shelter, Jonas turned back to Mira. Her face was pale, but there was something new in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. A spark of hope, however small. "We'll keep running," Jonas said, his voice steady, "but we'll do it together." The storm outside raged with renewed fury as Jonas and Mira moved quickly through the snow-covered landscape of Erythia Prime. The winds howled like the screeches of a lost soul, biting through their clothes and stinging their exposed skin. The blizzard seemed almost alive, relentless in its assault, turning the world around them into a chaotic, swirling mess of white. Visibility was near zero, and every step they took felt like a battle just to stay upright. Jonas could feel the cold gnawing at his bones, but the sense of urgency pushed him forward. The Guardian was still behind them, its massive form lost somewhere in the distance. For now they were safe, at least for a moment. But Jonas knew it wouldn't last. The machine was relentless, and no matter how much distance they gained, it would never stop hunting them. His thoughts raced as they moved through the storm, the weight of their situation sinking in. They reached a small rocky outcrop that provided some shelter from the wind. The makeshift hiding spot was little more than a shallow cave, but it was enough to give them a momentary respite. Jonas crouched low beside Mira, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to get his bearings. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a dull, aching exhaustion that made it hard to focus. But there was no time to rest. Not yet. The Guardian would find them soon enough. Mira collapsed against the cold stone wall, her face pale and her breathing shallow. She was trembling, but it wasn't just from the cold. Jonas could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had been with her since they first met. It wasn't just the storm or the Guardian or even the royal hunters that she feared. It was something deeper, something that Jonas had yet to understand. For the first time since their flight began, Jonas took a moment to truly look at her. The woman who had been the target of an ancient machine, the one whose very blood triggered a hunt that spanned across galaxies. Mira wasn't just a random victim in a war she had no part in. She was something more. Mira, Jonas said softly, his voice almost lost in the howling wind. I need to understand. Why is the Guardian after you? What's really going on? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stared at the ground, her hands trembling in her lap. Jonas could see the battle within her. She wanted to tell him he could feel it, but there was something holding her back, something she couldn't bear to share. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, and in them he saw a deep, unfathomable sorrow. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking with the weight of the secret she had carried for so long. The Guardian isn't just hunting me because I'm a royal, it's because of what I am, what I was made to be. Jonas leaned in slightly, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? What were you made to be? Mira closed her eyes for a moment, as though steeling herself against the pain of the truth. Her voice, when she spoke again, was barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid the storm would carry her words away. I'm not just a princess, she began. I'm a product of a program my people developed to create the perfect protectors, the Auto-Guardians. They were made to defend the royal family from any threat. But they needed a way to ensure loyalty, to ensure the Guardians would never be corrupted. So they created me. Jonas's confusion deepened, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. My genetic code was altered. Mira explained, her voice thick with emotion. I was designed to be the key to the Guardian system. They embedded a special code in my DNA that would trigger the activation of the Guardians, and that code would ensure that the Guardians would always protect the royal family, no matter what. But what they didn't realize was that the same code made me a target. The Guardians, instead of protecting me, see me as a threat, a defect. Jonas sat in stunned silence, the gravity of her words sinking in. The woman before him, the one he had been fighting to protect, wasn't just a helpless fugitive. She was the reason the war between the royal family and the Guardians existed. She was the key to a system that had been designed to control and dominate, and in the process she had become both its product and its victim. They made you a weapon, Jonas muttered, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. But they didn't know how dangerous that weapon would be. Mira nodded, the faintest hint of tears welling in her eyes. I've been running my whole life from them, from the Guardians, from the truth. I never wanted this. I didn't ask for it, but now I'm stuck in this cycle. Every time I try to escape, they send the Guardians after me. I can't outrun my own bloodline, Jonas. Her words hit Jonas harder than he expected. He had thought her life was one of survival, of being hunted by those who sought to control her. But what she was describing was something deeper. It was a betrayal by her own people, a betrayal that had turned her into a living weapon, a tool for their own twisted purposes. And now she was trapped in a system that saw her as both a prize and a danger. Jonas's heart clenched with sympathy, but there was something else too, something darker. The more he learned about Mira, the more he realized the full scale of the conflict they were caught in. This wasn't just a random pursuit. This wasn't just some chance encounter. They were in the middle of something much larger, a battle for power, for control, and Mira, the woman he had rescued, was at the center of it. How do we stop it? Jonas asked, his voice low and determined. How do we stop the Guardians from hunting you? Mira's eyes met his, and for the first time Jonas saw something new in them. Hope. Not the kind of fleeting hope that came with moments of survival, but the kind that came with the possibility of freedom, of choice. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "But I have to find out. I have to end this. For myself. For everyone who's been hurt by it." Jonas nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll find a way together. We'll end this." For a brief moment they shared a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together. They were no longer just two people trying to survive. They were bound by a cause, now one that transcended their personal struggles. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for something much greater. Freedom. Jonas glanced out at the storm, his thoughts turning toward their next move. The Guardian had been temporarily disabled, but it wouldn't be long before it came after them again. They needed to keep moving. They needed to find answers, find a way to stop this madness. But as he turned his attention back to Mira, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. "We're not running anymore," Jonas said firmly. "We're going to fight back." Mira looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before it softened. She nodded, a small, determined smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes," she said. "Together." The wind howled like a beast, its voice muffled by the thick walls of snow that now surrounded Jonas and Mira. The storm outside, fierce as ever, had reached a terrifying peak, making the icy world around them appear as if it were an endless white void. The blizzard raged with a ferocity that no living thing could survive for long in. But inside their makeshift shelter, amidst the suffocating cold and howling winds, Jonas and Mira shared a quiet moment. For the first time in hours, they were relatively safe. But safety was fleeting. Mira sat on the cold stone floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes focused on something invisible in the distance. Her face was pale, and Jonas could see the exhaustion weighing heavily on her. She had been through more than anyone should ever have to endure, hunted by a machine, betrayed by her own people, and carrying the burden of her bloodline's sins. But despite everything, there was a spark in her eyes, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. Jonas couldn't help but admire her strength, even as the weight of their mission pressed down on them both. They had a plan. They had to find Arik, the mysterious officer inside the royal family's ranks, who might be able to help them bring down the Guardian and end the royal bloodline's twisted reign. The storm had been their cover, but they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Guardian, the one thing that had made her life a living hell, would soon catch up with them. Jonas knew it. Mira knew it. They both felt it deep in their bones. The faintest hum cut through the wind. At first, Jonas thought it was just the storm, the swirling of the snow against the shelter. But the hum grew louder, more distinct. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm holstered at his waist, but he didn't draw it yet. The sound was mechanical, artificial. He glanced at Mira, who had already stiffened, her body taut with tension. "Do you hear that?" Jonas whispered, his voice tight with realization. Mira nodded slowly, her expression hardening. "It's the Guardian," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's found us." Jonas felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had hoped they might have gained enough distance to stay ahead of the machine, but the cold reality of their situation hit him like a punch to the gut. The Guardian, relentless in its pursuit, would never stop. It was built to track, to hunt, to kill. And now it was coming for them. The hum grew louder, vibrating the air around them. A low rumble beneath the ground signaled the awakening of something ancient. Something unstoppable. The Guardian was activating. Its systems were coming online. Jonas's mind raced. They had no weapons capable of destroying it, no plans beyond running and hoping for a miracle. And yet here they were cornered by the very thing they had been running from. Jonas glanced at Mira, who stood up with a sudden, sharp movement, her body tense and ready for action. "We can't outrun it," Jonas said, his voice low but resolute. "We have to stand and fight." Mira's eyes flickered with the familiar fear, but there was something else in them now, a quiet resolve. "We'll try," she said, her voice barely audible against the rising hum. "But if we fail—" "If we fail," Jonas interrupted, his voice. "Unwavering, we die fighting." She nodded, the weight of his words settling between them. There was no escaping this. They couldn't outrun the Guardian, and they couldn't hide. They had to fight back, no matter how impossible it seemed. Jonas moved to the corner of the shelter, his mind working through their limited options. The only thing he had on hand was the rifle and some makeshift tools, scavenged items he had picked up during their escape. It wasn't much, but he had to make it work. He couldn't allow the Guardian to tear through them without a fight. The hum outside intensified, vibrating through the floor. The shelter seemed to shake under the weight of its presence. Jonas felt his breath quicken as he grabbed what tools he could find. He needed to buy them time. Anything. The Guardian would be here soon. Mira said, her voice low but filled with urgency. It's getting closer. It's coming. Jonas barely heard her over the sound of his own heartbeat. His hands moved with practiced precision as he began to rig together what he could from the scraps around them. He was working fast, every movement sharp and efficient. If they were going to survive, they needed a way to disable the Guardian, or at least slow it down. I'm going to try to overload its sensors, Jonas muttered, more to himself than to Mira. If I can cause a malfunction, it might give us enough time to escape. Mira stepped forward, her eyes wide with concern. That's too risky. You won't be able to destroy it that way. I don't have a choice, Jonas replied. It's the only shot we've got. With a final glance at Mira, Jonas turned back to his work. His fingers moved quickly, connecting wires and components in an improvised circuit. He knew it was a long shot, but he had no other options. The hum from the Guardian outside grew louder, and Jonas could feel the air itself beginning to crackle with the machine's presence. It was close. Too close. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside, followed by the sound of the shelter's door being ripped open with terrifying ease. Jonas spun around just in time to see the massive shape of the Guardian's metallic form fill the entrance. Its red eyes glowed like embers in the dark storm, scanning the room with terrifying precision. The Guardian's body gleamed in the dim light, its form towering over them both. It was built for one purpose: to protect the royal family by destroying any threat, no matter the cost. And now Mira was its target. Jonas's hand tightened on the rifle, but he didn't fire yet. He had to wait for the right moment. The Guardian took another step inside, its movements slow and methodical, as if savoring the fear it instilled in its prey. I am the Guardian of the royal line, it intoned in a cold, mechanical voice. You are a defect, Mira. You must be terminated. Jonas's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. The machine's presence filled the room, and Jonas could feel his body reacting to the immense pressure it brought with it. Mira was frozen, her body rigid with fear, as she stared at the Guardian, unable to tear her eyes away from the death that was now inches away from her. Jonas took a deep breath, and then with a grim resolve pulled the makeshift device from his belt. He had no time to waste. The Guardian was about to fire. In a flash, Jonas threw the device toward the Guardian, hitting its central core with a resounding crash. The machine's glowing red eyes flickered as it staggered back. Its targeting system began to glitch, the once smooth movements of its massive limbs growing jerky and erratic. The overloaded system was working, but it wasn't enough. With a terrifying shriek, the Guardian activated its weapons. The air around them hummed as energy built up in its cannons, and Jonas knew they had seconds before it fired. Run, he shouted to Mira. But Mira was already moving. Her instincts kicked in, and she darted toward the exit, throwing herself into the storm without hesitation. Jonas followed, his heart in his throat. The Guardian, temporarily disabled, but not defeated, staggered forward, its systems beginning to come back online. But they were already outside. The storm welcomed them with open arms, its cold embrace swallowing them whole. The world around them was a blur of white, but Jonas knew they couldn't stop now. They couldn't stop running. Behind them, the Guardian's roar echoed through the storm, its pursuit far from over. The storm outside was a living, breathing thing. Its icy fingers whipped through the night, slashing against Jonas and Mira as they staggered through the snow, their footsteps swallowed by the howling wind. Every few moments, the blizzard would part just enough to reveal the faintest outline of the jagged terrain, only to be smothered by the fury of the storm once again. Visibility was almost non-existent, and the bitter cold bit at their skin like shards of glass. They ran stumbling over the snowdrifts as the sound of the Guardian's pursuit reverberated in their minds. Its massive, unrelenting presence was still fresh in their thoughts, its towering frame, its crimson eyes locked on Mira as if she were a mere piece in a game of cat and mouse. The Guardian had already proven that it would stop at nothing to capture her, to erase her from existence, and no matter how far they ran, it would follow. Jonas didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His eyes were fixed ahead on the distant glacier caves that loomed like a sanctuary in the middle of the desolate landscape. They were their only hope of survival. The caves had been formed over millennia by shifting ice and rock, creating a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers deep within the heart of the frozen mountain range. Jonas knew from his reconnaissance that they were a natural refuge, a place where the storm's fury couldn't. But the wind didn't care. The storm didn't care. The blizzard's fury was all-consuming, and every gust of snow seemed to push them further from the sanctuary they sought. Jonas pulled Mira closer, her frail body pressed against his side as they pushed through the cold. She was slowing down, and he could see it in her eyes, fatigue, fear, and the heavy weight of the burden she carried. The past few days had drained them both. She had already been running for years before meeting Jonas, and now after everything they had been through, she was ready to break. Jonas could feel it in every step they took. She wasn't just running from the Guardian anymore. She was running from... Mira, Jonas said, his voice steady but strained. "We're almost there. Just a little further." She nodded, her lips trembling in the cold. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, but her gaze was unwavering. "I know," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I won't stop." They pushed on the glacier caves just visible through the swirling storm. Jonas could feel the ground beneath them changing. The snow was less dense here, and the air, though still biting, seemed to grow sharper, colder. They were getting closer. After what felt like an eternity, Jonas finally saw the entrance to the caves ahead. A jagged cliff of ice towered above them, its sharp edges glistening in the faint moonlight that barely pierced the storm. The entrance was narrow, a dark opening that beckoned them into the relative safety of the caves. "We have to move quickly," Jonas muttered. "We can't risk being caught outside." He quickened his pace, pushing forward with everything he had. Mira, though exhausted, followed her footsteps, faltering but determined. She glanced over her shoulder once, and Jonas saw the fear in her eyes as she realized that the Guardian was closing in. Its massive form was still visible in the storm, moving with terrifying speed, its sensor systems already compensating for the malfunction Jonas had caused. They didn't have much time. The entrance to the cave was narrow, barely wide enough for both of them to squeeze through side by side. They entered quickly, the icy walls surrounding them as they descended into the relative darkness. The air inside the caves was a stark contrast to the howling winds outside, still cold, but with a crispness that seemed to offer a brief respite from the relentless storm. Jonas's heart still raced as he glanced over at Mira. She was struggling to catch her breath, her face flushed with the exertion of running in the cold. He knew they couldn't rest for long. The caves might offer shelter, but they were far from safe. They moved further into the depths of the cave, the sharp echoes of their footsteps reverberating off the ice and rock. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until Jonas could barely see his hand in front of his face. But the familiar cold, the scent of ice and stone, was comforting in a way. It was a reminder that they weren't completely alone, that there was still a chance to survive, to outlast the storm and the machine that hunted them. Jonas stopped for a moment to catch his breath, his back pressed against the cold wall of ice. Mira, still breathing heavily, leaned against a nearby rock, her body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. Her eyes were distant, her mind seemingly far away, caught in some private storm of her own. "We can't stop yet," Jonas said quietly, his voice low but urgent. "We need to keep moving. The Guardian won't stop until it's found us. And when it does..." He trailed off, unsure of what to say next. There was no real plan, no real escape. They were trapped in this labyrinth of ice and stone, surrounded by nothing but cold and darkness, with the knowledge that the Guardian was close, always close. Mira nodded, but she didn't speak. She had withdrawn into herself again, her mind occupied by something far deeper than the immediate threat of the Guardian. Jonas could see it in the way she held herself, the way her body had gone still. She was running from something more than just the machine chasing her. But what they pressed on, moving deeper into the caves. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them through narrow passages that wound deeper and deeper into the ice. The further they went, the more claustrophobic it became, the walls closing in around them. The temperature dropped, and Jonas could feel the cold biting into his bones, but he forced himself to ignore it. They passed through a narrow archway, and suddenly the tunnel opened up into a massive chamber. The ceiling of the cave soared high above them, its jagged peaks disappearing into the shadows. The walls were smooth, a stark contrast to the chaotic ice and rock outside. Jonas could see traces of ancient carvings on the walls, remnants of a time long forgotten. The chamber was vast, its depths unexplored, but it offered them something they hadn't had in day space, a moment of respite. "This will do," Jonas said quietly, his voice echoing off the walls. "We can rest here for a bit." Mira didn't respond. She was standing at the edge of the chamber, her eyes distant as she gazed into the darkness. Jonas hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked over to her. "Mira," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've made it. For now. We're safe." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in hours, she seemed to see him, not the warrior fighting alongside her, but the man who had promised to protect her. A flicker of something passed between them, something fragile, something vulnerable. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to get caught up in this. I never wanted you to see what I am, what I've become." Jonas shook his head, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "You don't owe me any apologies," he said firmly. "We're in this together. You're not alone." Mira took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a raw, unspoken grief. But beneath that, there was something else, something deeper, something that Jonas had seen before, but never quite understood. "I don't know how to live with this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to stop running." Jonas's heart ached for her, for the pain that she carried. He had seen it in her eyes before, the burden of a past that she couldn't escape. But in that moment, as they stood together in the cold, dark caves of Erythia Prime, he knew one thing for certain. They would face it together. And somehow, some way, they would find a way to survive. The cave was cold. The air was thick with the scent of ancient ice and rock, the silence broken only by the soft echo of their breathing. The storm outside, a relentless force of nature, continued to roar. But in the depths of the glacier caves, there was an eerie stillness, as though the very walls themselves held their breath in anticipation. Jonas and Mira had found a small alcove deep within the cave system, sheltered from the storm. The walls of the chamber were smooth polished by centuries of shifting ice, and the space was oddly comforting after days of running. Mira had collapsed against the wall, her exhaustion palpable. Jonas, ever watchful, sat opposite her, his rifle within arm's reach. The silence between them was heavy, but there was something more, an unspoken tension that neither of them could escape. Mira had barely spoken since they entered the cave. She was distant, lost in thought, as though she were fighting a battle inside her own mind. Jonas knew that something had changed in her. The fear, the anxiety, it was still there. But there was something new now, a deeper weight. He didn't know how to reach her. He didn't know how to help her fight the demons of her past, the ones that still haunted her, still controlled her every decision. He wanted to ask, to demand answers about her past, about the Guardian, and the role she played in its creation. But he knew that now wasn't the time. Mira had been through enough. She needed to come to him in her own time when she was ready. But Mira's silence only grew heavier. "Mira," Jonas said softly, breaking the silence. "What happened back there? With the Guardian, when you said it was because of you, because of what you were made to be?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the ground, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the dust on the cave floor. Jonas could see the tension in her shoulders, the deep, controlled breathing that betrayed her inner struggle. She was battling something inside herself, something she wasn't ready to face yet. Jonas, Mira finally spoke, her voice low, hesitant. "I never wanted you to know the truth. I didn't want you to see the monster I've become." Jonas felt his heart tighten. He stood up, moving closer to her. "You're not a monster, Mira. You're—" "I am," she interrupted, her voice sharp, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and shame. "I was made to be one, to be used, to control others. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. None of us did." Jonas sat down beside her, his gaze softening. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me what happened. I can't help you if I don't know what we're up against." Mira's lips trembled for a moment before she exhaled deeply, as though bracing herself for the weight of her own memories. She looked at him, then her eyes filled with a sadness so deep that it seemed to pull at the very core of her being. "I was born as part of a program," she began, her voice distant. "The royal family, the ones I'm supposed to belong to, didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a tool, a weapon. The Auto Guardians were created to protect the royal family to ensure their power and control over the galaxy. But they didn't want just any guardians. They wanted perfect protectors, unwavering, loyal, and invincible. Jonas listened intently, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. He knew Mira was no ordinary woman. She was caught in something far darker than he had imagined. My genetic code. Mira continued, her voice quieter now, was manipulated. It was changed. They embedded a series of markers, genetic codes that triggered the Auto Guardians. They thought that by linking me to the Guardians, I could be used to activate them whenever needed. I became the key. But what they didn't realize was that the same code that made me the key also made me a target. Jonas felt the weight of her words settle over him like a cold fog. So the Guardian isn't just after you because you're royal, it's after you because you're the one who created it. Mira nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. Yes, I didn't create it in the traditional sense. I wasn't the one who built it, but my existence, the very fact that I was born the way I was the catalyst. The Guardians were created to protect the royal family. But when they realized I could trigger them, they started using me. I was never meant to live a life. I was meant to be a tool. Jonas's mind raced as he processed the gravity of her words. Mira was not just a victim of the royal family's manipulation. She was the heart of their weapon, the one who had unknowingly fueled the very machine that now hunted her. But why didn't you fight back? Jonas asked softly. Why didn't you leave sooner? Mira let out a bitter laugh, though it lacked humor. I tried. I ran. For years, I ran from the Guardians, from my own family. But every time I tried to escape, they came after me. They controlled everything. The program they created, they made sure that no one could escape it, not even me. I was trapped. And then the Guardians became more than just machines. They became my curse. Every time I tried to escape, they would track me down. They had to. It was programmed into them. Jonas placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. She flinched at first, but then she relaxed, leaning slightly into his touch. The weight of her confession had left her exhausted, and for the first time since they had met, Jonas saw her vulnerability. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted to be the cause of all this destruction. The Guardians, everything they've done, it's because of me, and I can't stop it. Jonas shook his head, his gaze intense. You're not responsible for what they've done to you, Mira. You're just a part of their plan. But that doesn't mean it has to end this way. She looked up at him, then her eyes filled with unshed tears. It's too late for that. The Guardian, the program, it's all I am, all I've ever been. Jonas's mind was spinning. The implications of what Mira had told him were staggering. She had been born to serve a purpose, manipulated into being the key to the royal family's power. And in doing so, she had unknowingly become the catalyst for the very war they were fighting. The Guardian was not just a machine, it was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, everything Mira had been forced to carry. Mira, we can't just let this continue, Jonas said, his voice steady with resolve. You're not their tool. You're a person, and you deserve to live. You deserve to be free. And I'll help you make sure that happens. Her eyes flickered with a hint of something, hope, or perhaps the faintest spark of belief. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the weight of the reality they faced. I don't know if I can stop this, Mira said, her voice thick with sorrow. But I have to try. I can't keep running. I have to end it. For myself. For the galaxy. Jonas nodded. He didn't know how, but he knew they would find a way. They had to. Mira paused for a moment, her eyes drifting to the shadows of the cave as if seeing something beyond the walls. Her fingers grazed the edges of the icy surface around her. I created the Guardians, Jonas. They were built for one purpose, to protect. But in the process, they became the very thing that will destroy us. Jonas took a deep breath. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew one thing: the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. We'll stop it, Jonas said firmly. Together. Mira looked at him, her expression weary but resolute. For the first time, she allowed herself to trust. The weight of the past was still there, heavy as stone, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of light, a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. And as the storm raged outside, Mira and Jonas both knew that the path ahead would be dangerous. But they had each other. and together they would fight to put an end to the legacy that had shaped Mira's life and the galaxy's fate. The cave had grown colder, the oppressive silence hanging between Jonas and Mira like a veil. The storm outside, though fierce, felt distant now as they huddled deep in the glacier caves. They were both worn thin, drained by the constant tension, the running, the fear that never seemed to leave them. Every moment was a reminder of their fragility, the danger that constantly lurked just beyond their reach. But despite the growing fatigue, there was a quiet determination in the air. The conversation they had shared in the cave had allowed a sliver of hope to break through the darkness of their situation. Mira had opened up to Jonas, revealing the truth about her past and the terrible burdens she carried. She had been born into a life of manipulation, of being used as the key to an ancient weapon. The Guardians, the machines that had relentlessly hunted her, were the result of her very existence. The weight of that knowledge, the realization that everything she had known was a lie, had taken a toll on her. But now there was a chance to break free from the chains of her past. Jonas had promised to help her, to find a way to stop the Guardian and dismantle the program that had created her. But they both knew that it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty, and trust would be their most valuable weapon. Mira had been betrayed before by those closest to her. Her entire life had been shaped by lies, and the scars of that betrayal ran deep. "Do you really think we can stop it?" Mira asked suddenly, her voice low, her words heavy with doubt. She was sitting against the cold wall of the cave, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared into the shadows. The flickering light from the small fire they had started cast long, wavering shadows against the walls, adding to the eerie stillness of the cave. Jonas, who had been lost in thought, looked up at her. His face was shadowed, but his expression was one of quiet resolve. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to believe that we can. We've already come this far." Mira turned her head to meet his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't know what you're getting into. You're not just fighting a machine. You're fighting a system that's been in place for generations." Jonas stood up and moved closer to her, his eyes unwavering. "You've been running your whole life. You've been hiding, protecting yourself from the very people who created you. I don't think it's fair to ask you to keep running. Not anymore." Mira's breath caught in her throat. She blinked quickly, but Jonas could see the tremble in her lips. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the cave's vast silence. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore. I've trusted before, and I've been betrayed." Jonas's heart clenched as he watched her struggle with the words. He knew the pain she had endured, the emotional scars that had left her closed off from the world. Mira was used to running. She was used to hiding. It wasn't just the Guardian that she feared. It was the betrayal that had shaped her life. "I'm not going to betray you," Jonas said, his voice steady and unwavering. "You can trust me, I promise." But before Mira could respond, there was a sudden sound, a soft, almost imperceptible crunch of snow. Jonas froze, every muscle in his body tensing. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a faint, distorted voice, a voice that seemed strangely familiar. "Mira," the voice said, echoing through the cavern. "Mira, it's me." Mira's face paled, her eyes widening in disbelief. "No, it can't be," she whispered under her breath. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, scanning the darkness around them. The voice was coming from the mouth of the cave, just beyond the reach of the firelight. He instinctively stepped forward, but Mira held out a hand to stop him, her eyes wide with shock. "Eric," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonas's mind raced. Eric. The name was unfamiliar to him, but the tone of Mira's voice, so filled with surprise and disbelief, told him that this person was someone important, someone she trusted. But something in the way Mira was reacting set off alarm bells in Jonas's mind. There was a hidden fear in her eyes, something she wasn't saying. The voice came again, louder this time. "Mira, it's really me. I've come to help you. I can get you out of here. I can get you away from the Guardian." Jonas's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but Mira didn't seem to hear them. She was already moving toward the mouth of the cave, her face filled with a mix of hope and fear. Her steps were hesitant, but she didn't stop. Her body was drawn to the voice as if it had been a lifeline thrown into the storm. "Mira, wait," Jonas called, but she didn't respond. She was too far gone, lost in the hope that this person, this Arik, was really there to help her. Jonas could see it in her eyes. She wanted to believe. She had to believe. Jonas followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. Something wasn't right. Mira's face had hardened, her emotions battling for control as she stepped into the cold, dark tunnel leading further into the caves. As he reached her side, he grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Mira, listen to me," he said, his voice low, desperate. "You don't know who this is. You don't know if you can trust him." She shook her head, her voice trembling. I have to. I have to trust him. He's the only one who can help us. He's been helping me from the inside, trying to stop the royal family, trying to bring down the Guardians." Jonas's mind was spinning. If Arik had truly been helping Mira, why had she never mentioned him before? And why now, when they were on the verge of victory, was he suddenly appearing out of nowhere? But before he could say another word, Mira pulled away from him, her gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. "Arik," she called, her voice a whisper of hope. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in a thick layer of snow, his features obscured by the dark of the cave. As the figure stepped into the faint light of their campfire, Jonas's heart stopped. The man was familiar too. Familiar. Arik was not a stranger. He was the one Jonas had seen earlier in the royal archives. The man who had betrayed them all. "No," Jonas shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "You how?" Mira froze, her body going stiff as she turned to look at Jonas. But it was too late. The moment of betrayal had already passed. Arik's face was twisted into a cruel grin. "Mira," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Did you really think I was on your side? That I was here to help you?" The shock hit Mira like a wave, her body trembling with the realization that everything she had hoped for, everything she had trusted, had been a lie. You betrayed me," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. Arik stepped forward, his cold eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. "You were always just a tool, a pawn in a game much bigger than you. And now, you're expendable." Before Jonas could react, Arik reached into his coat, pulling out a small device. He pressed a button, and the cave lit up with an eerie green glow as a series of mechanical drones hidden in the walls of the cave activated. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Mira's eyes widened as she turned to face Jonas. "We've been played," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the betrayal. Jonas didn't waste another second. He shoved Mira behind him, drawing his rifle and preparing for a fight. But the drones were already descending on them, their glowing red eyes fixed on their targets. "Run," Jonas shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get to the exit, I'll hold them off." Mira hesitated, her heart racing as she faced the man who had once been her ally, her friend. But now he was nothing more than another enemy in the long line of people who had betrayed her. And this time there would be no escape. The cave, once a sanctuary from the raging storm outside, had become a battlefield. The betrayal, a cold, sharp shock that rippled through Jonas and Mira, echoed in the very air around them. The faint glow of the mechanical drone's eyes illuminated the darkness, their movements swift and calculated as they descended on the small alcove where Jonas and Mira stood. Mira's body was frozen, her heart still reeling from the shock of Arik's betrayal. The man who had been her ally, her only hope, was now the enemy. His cruel grin, the malice in his eyes, made it clear that he had never been on her side. It had all been a lie. Jonas's mind raced each second, feeling like an eternity, as the drones swarmed toward them. There was no time to plan, no time to think. They had to act, and they had to act now. He shoved Mira behind him, his rifle raised and ready, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Get to the exit," Jonas shouted, his voice urgent, his eyes scanning the cave for any advantage. "I'll hold them off." Mira hesitated, fear and disbelief etched on her face, but the reality of their situation hit her like a cold slap. There was no time to dwell on betrayal. There was no time to ask why Arik had done this. They had to survive, and that meant running as fast as they could. Mira turned, her body moving as if on instinct, and dashed toward the narrow passage leading out of the cave. But before she could take more than a few steps, the drone closest to her surged forward, its mechanical limbs whirring as it aimed directly at her. The air hummed with the power of its energy weapons, and Jonas knew that if the drones were allowed to reach her, there would be no escape. With a guttural yell, Jonas fired his rifle, the shot ringing out through the cavern. The drone closest to Mira staggered back, its systems briefly malfunctioning from the impact. But the momentary victory was short-lived. The drones quickly adapted their targeting systems, recalibrating, and they began to swarm in earnest, descending from the shadows above and around them. The metallic click of their movements was deafening in the tight space, their cold, glowing eyes fixed on their prey. Jonas gritted his teeth as he fired again, his rifle jerking in his hands with the force of each shot. The drones were fast, too fast, and his shots weren't enough. He couldn't take them all down. His only option was to buy Mira enough time to escape. He had to make a stand. "Mira, go!" he shouted again, his voice hoarse, raw with urgency. "Run!" Mira hesitated again, her body trembling as she looked back at him, her heart wrenched at the sight of him standing there fighting for her, when he didn't owe her anything, when all he had known was war and betrayal. "I can't leave you," she cried, her voice strained. "You have to." Jonas's voice broke through her hesitation. "You can't help me here. Go." The drones were closing in. The air hummed with their energy as they powered up their weapons, their red eyes glowing brighter as they prepared to fire. Jonas wasn't sure how much longer he could hold them off. His rifle was running low on ammo and the drones kept coming. They were relentless. He needed to give Mira the chance to escape. The sound of Mira's boots slapping against the cold stone echoed in Jonas's ears as she ran, but it wasn't enough. He could hear her faltering, the hesitation in her steps. She was scared, scared of losing him, scared of what she was leaving behind. Jonas pushed forward, positioning himself between Mira and the drones, his back against the ice wall of the cave. He could hear the mechanical whirring of the drones as they moved in on him. His hand shook, his grip tightening around the rifle as the drones advanced. "You're not taking her," he growled under his breath. He fired again, but the drones kept coming. He wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough. The weapons on his rifle began to fail, the shots less effective with every squeeze of the trigger. Jonas's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He had to do something, anything, to stop the drones from reaching Mira. With a sudden burst of energy, he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from one of the drones. He slammed into the ground, rolling to his feet in a fluid motion. His hand found a jagged piece of ice from the cave floor, a sharp, deadly weapon. He didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, he threw the ice shard into the air, aiming for the drone's weak spot. The shard struck its core, sending a crackling spark through its system. The drone staggered back, its movements jerky and erratic. It was enough to give Jonas a moment to breathe, but he knew it wouldn't last. Mira had made it to the entrance of the cave, her body trembling with exertion and fear. But she didn't stop. She turned to look back, her eyes filled with desperation, longing, and helplessness. Jonas could see it in her face. She wasn't ready to leave him behind, to abandon the only person who had stood by her, even when everything had seemed lost. But Jonas couldn't allow that. He couldn't let her stay, couldn't let her fall into the same trap that had ensnared him for so long. "You have to live," Jonas shouted, his voice breaking. "Go!" And with that final command, Mira ran her legs, carrying her faster than she ever had before, away from Jonas, away from the fight. She pushed herself through the narrow passage, her heart in her throat, as the sound of the drone's pursuit filled her ears. But she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. She had to survive. Jonas, still holding his ground, let the last of his rifle's ammo fly. The drone's weapons flared, their targeting systems locking onto him. The moment of silence that followed was deafening. It felt like time had slowed to a crawl. He had no more time. His rifle was empty and his legs were shaking with exhaustion. The drones were closing in. Jonas gritted his teeth and stepped forward, his fist tightening around the makeshift weapon he had fashioned. He wasn't going to let them take him without a fight. The drones moved in for the kill, their weapons humming with energy. Jonas didn't flinch. He was done running. He had given everything he had to protect Mira, and now there was nothing left to give. But he would not go down without a fight. He would take as many of them with him as he could. The first drone reached him, its weapon raised, the energy beam poised to strike. Jonas charged forward, the ice shard in his hand raised. With one final scream, he hurled the shard at the drone, aiming for its core. The impact sent the drone spiraling into the wall, its systems short-circuiting as sparks flew from its body. The others followed, and Jonas fought until he could fight no more, each striking a final desperate attempt to hold them off for just a little longer. The world around him spun, his vision growing dark as the drones closed in. He felt his strength falter, his body giving out under the weight of his exhaustion. But in that moment, he knew he had done everything he could. He had bought her time, and that was enough. The storm outside had grown quieter, the howling winds dying down to a faint whisper as the snow continued to fall in thick, relentless sheets. Mira stumbled through the icy labyrinth of the glacier caves, her breath ragged and shallow, her body trembling from both the cold and the weight of what had just transpired. Jonas had held them off. He had fought with everything he had, giving her the precious moments she needed to escape. She had run. She had made it out. But at what cost? The ache in her chest was unbearable, a heavy, constant pressure that seemed to follow her with every step. Jonas was still back there. He had stayed behind the last line of defense, and now he was alone. She could still hear the echo of his voice in her mind, urging her to survive. She had to survive. She had no choice. But the guilt gnawed at her deep and insidious, as if every step she took away from him made her complicit in his fate. How could she leave him behind? How could she be the one to live while he gave his life to ensure her escape? Her footsteps faltered as she approached a narrow passage deep within the caves, her hands bracing against the cold walls for support. She wasn't sure where she was going. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. But something inside her told her that she had to keep moving, that there was still a chance for them to win, a chance for her to stop running. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through her thoughts, sending a fresh surge of panic through her body. She stopped listening intently, her heart hammering in her chest. It was the Guardian. She could feel it in her bones, that cold presence she had known all too well. It was closing in, hunting her relentlessly, following her every move. But she couldn't go back. She couldn't face Jonas's sacrifice and undo what he had done. She couldn't let it be for nothing. The voice that had been haunting her, the voice that had once been filled with so much hope and trust, whispered in her mind, urging her to fight. She could feel him with her, even now. "I won't stop," Jonas had said, and neither would she. Taking a deep breath, Mira turned toward the deeper part of the cave, where the path curved sharply and descended into the heart of the mountain. There was a faint light ahead, a shimmer in the air that felt like a sign. She had to find it. She had to believe there was a way to end this, to make the Guardian's pursuit stop once and for all. She didn't know how long she walked or how many twists and turns the cave held, but soon the narrow passage opened up into a vast, cavernous chamber. It was dark save for the strange, eerie glow of the crystals embedded in the walls. They pulsed faintly with an unnatural light, casting long shadows across the ice-covered ground. Mira stepped forward, the silence around her suffocating as she moved deeper into the cave. And then she saw it. In the center of the cavern was a massive ancient structure covered in layers of frost and stone. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a ruin, old and forgotten, with intricate carvings of what appeared to be the same royal symbols that adorned the royal palace. But there was something else, a pattern, a strange energy that seemed to pulse from the structure as if it were alive. Mira approached cautiously, her mind racing with the possibilities of what it could be. She had never seen this place before, but something about it felt familiar. Something about it felt tied to her past, something she couldn't fully remember. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat as she reached out to touch one of the carvings on the wall. The moment her fingers brushed against the cold stone, the structure seemed to react. The energy around her flared to life, and the ground beneath her feet trembled as if the very mountain itself was awakening. A soft, mechanical whir filled the air, followed by a low hum as the structure began to glow brighter, its ancient mechanisms slowly coming to life. Mira recoiled instinctively, stepping back. But then the voice echoed in her mind again, the voice she knew all too well. "It's you," it said, a soft, familiar tone. "You're the key." Mira's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. It was the voice of the Guardians, the voice she had heard so many times before. The same voice that had haunted her since her birth, the voice that had been the constant reminder of her purpose. "Stop," Mira whispered to herself, shaking her head as she backed away from the structure. "I'm not your tool anymore." But it wasn't just the voice of the Guardian. It was something else, something more ancient and powerful. The structure before her was not just a relic, it was a key. The key to stopping the Guardian. the key to breaking the cycle that had bound her to it. Mira stepped forward again, her hand trembling as she placed it on the cold surface of the structure. The moment her fingers made contact, a burst of energy surged through her, blinding her for a split second. The world around her seemed to shift, and she was no longer in the cave. Instead, she stood in a vast open space surrounded by the bright golden light of an alien city. Strange, towering structures loomed above her, and in the distance she could see figures she didn't recognize. Yet somehow they felt familiar. They moved with purpose, their gazes fixed on something Mira couldn't see. Her heart raced as she looked around, trying to understand what was happening. She didn't know where she was or how she had gotten here. But the presence was stronger now. It was calling to her, urging her to step forward to embrace her destiny. No, Mira muttered, shaking her head. This is a trap. But the presence wouldn't let her go. The voice filled her mind, overwhelming her senses as it whispered words she could barely understand. Embrace your birthright, it urged. You are the Guardian's creation. You are the future. Mira collapsed to her knees, her mind spinning as the words echoed around her. She was the Guardian's creation. She had been born for this, to activate the Guardian, to control it, to be its key. But in that moment, as she knelt on the ground, everything inside her rebelled. She didn't want to be, this didn't want to be part of the system that had enslaved her for so long. And yet she knew that the only way to stop the Guardian, to break the cycle that had kept her running, was to confront it head on. To confront the truth of who she was and what she was meant to be. Mira stood up, her body trembling with the weight of her decision. No more running, she said, her voice breaking through the chaos of her thoughts. I am not your key anymore. I am not your tool. The light around her began to fade, and the city-like vision dissolved. She was back in the cave, her hands still pressed against the structure. The hum of energy around her was growing stronger, but now it felt different. It felt like it was waiting for her, expecting her to embrace it. But Mira didn't. She pulled her hand away, her breath ragged. I won't be what you want me to be. The cavern shook with a sudden tremor, and Mira realized that the energy from the structure had begun to shift. The walls around her crackled with power, the ancient mechanism now aware of her decision. The Guardian was still coming, but now Mira understood something crucial. It wasn't just about stopping the machine. It was about reclaiming herself. The caves rumbled, and in that moment Mira knew she was ready. It was time to confront everything she had been running from. The tremor in the cave passed, leaving Mira with an eerie stillness that filled the air around her. The structure in front of her, still faintly glowing with an otherworldly energy, had reacted to her defiance. She had confronted the force that had controlled her life, the invisible hand that had manipulated her every step. And yet, despite her actions, she knew this wasn't the end. It was merely a shift, a moment of clarity that would allow her to fight back, but not a resolution in itself. Her breathing was uneven as she stepped back from the strange alien structure. Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. She had rejected the call to embrace her role as the key to the Guardian, the tool of her royal bloodline's power. But what did that really mean? Was she free now? Could she stop the machine that had been hunting her for so long? But there was something else, something that Mira couldn't quite shake. The knowledge that the Guardian wasn't just a mechanical construct, it was more than that. It was a creation of her bloodline, born from the very essence of what she was. The moment she had touched the structure, the alien energy had surged through her veins, deepening her connection to the machine, awakening something hidden inside her. She could still feel it, the thrumming pulse of the ancient energy in her bones, like the heartbeat of a ghost. The echo of the Guardian's presence was still there, hanging like a shadow over her every thought. The machine had recognized her as its origin, and that recognition wasn't just about control. It was something deeper, a bond, an unspoken connection forged by the blood that ran through her veins. She could feel it calling to her now, even as she stood in the cave, the ancient power reverberating through the walls, demanding her attention. But Mira was no longer willing to be its pawn. As the cave settled back into silence, Mira turned and hurried back toward the narrow passage leading deeper into the glacier's heart. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not now. The Guardian would come, and when it did, she had to be ready. She had already run too far, hidden for too long. There was no escaping this fight, no running from the consequences of what she had become. But there was one thing that kept her going, Jonas. He had fought for her, and in that fight he had reminded her of who she could be. Not a weapon, not a tool, but someone capable of breaking free. Mira reached the entrance to the next cave, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She paused, adjusting her senses to the chill, her breath hanging in the air like steam. She could see the light flickering up ahead, the faint glow of the cave's deeper passage, where the labyrinth of tunnels stretched on like an endless maze. The Guardian was closing in. She could feel it in her bones, its relentless pursuit a weight on her mind. But she couldn't afford to think about it now. She had a mission. Turning toward the shadows that stretched across the cave walls, Mira spotted Jonas's figure, a familiar welcome presence standing at the threshold, his silhouette outlined against the dim glow of the cave. He had found her. "Jonas," she cried, her voice cracking with relief. Jonas stepped forward, his face drawn, but resolute. His expression softened when his eyes met hers, the exhaustion and tension of their shared journey reflected in the lines of his face. But there was something more there, something Mira had seen before in the heat of battle, in moments of life and death resolve. "Mira, you made it," Jonas said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't wait for a response before he crossed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that for the first time in a long while felt like a moment of peace. Mira let out a breath. She didn't realize she had been holding her body relaxing against his. For a fleeting second, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders, but then the storm of their reality returned crashing down around them. She stepped back, her face still pale but determined. "We don't have much time," Mira said, her voice firm. "The Guardian is coming, and it's not just going to stop hunting me. We have to make a stand." Jonas nodded, his eyes hardening with the same determination. "I'm with you, always." But Mira could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just with her out of obligation, out of some sense of duty. He was with her because he had chosen to be, because he had made the decision to fight beside her, despite the dangers, despite the uncertainty. They moved quickly through the icy corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Mira led the way, her mind still swirling with everything she had learned, everything she had felt in the heart of the cave. The connection to the Guardian was still there, like an invisible thread, but she had severed it. She had refused to become the weapon they had wanted her to be. But that didn't mean the machine would stop hunting her. No, it would come. And when it did, it would be stronger than before. The deeper they ventured into the caves, the colder it became, the air heavy with a sense of finality. Mira's thoughts drifted back to Jonas. He had fought to protect her, to keep her alive. But how long would that last? The Guardian was a relentless force, and it was no longer just a machine. It was a part of her tied to her very existence. She had to stop it. She had to break the cycle that had trapped her for so long. Jonas glanced over at Mira, his voice low but filled with determination. "We can end this. Together." They continued on in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts, the path narrowing until it opened into another cavern. This one was different. It was much larger, with towering ice formations that jutted from the ground like massive stalagmites, reaching for the high ceiling, which was covered in a shimmering sheet of ice. The glow of the cave's bioluminescent crystals reflected off the ice, creating an ethereal, almost haunting light. "This is it," Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the presence of the Guardian, even now, its cold grip tightening around her like a vice. She had brought them here for a reason, but even now she couldn't shake the fear that still lurked deep within her. "This is where we'll make our stand." Jonas scanned the cavern, his eyes sharp. "What do you need me to do?" Mira stepped into the center of the cavern, her eyes scanning the area. "I'm going to end it. I'll activate the core of the Guardian, the central system. It's here, buried beneath the ice. Once I activate it, the entire system will reboot. The Guardian will be unable to operate without its core. But I'll need you to hold off the drones to give me time to do this." Jonas met her gaze, his jaw set with unwavering determination. "I'll give you all the time you need." Mira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she stepped closer to the center of the cavern. She could feel the presence of the core deep beneath the ground, its power pulsing in the air like an electrical current. She had never felt anything like it before. The Guardian's core was the heart of its existence, The engine that powered the machine, the link between her bloodline and the creation that had hunted her for years. Mira knelt to the icy ground, her fingers brushing the surface. The energy from the core surged through her as she activated the ancient mechanism hidden beneath the ice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a sudden jolt, the ground trembled, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it became a deafening roar. The Guardian was awakening. The ground trembled beneath Mira's knees as she knelt in the center of the cavern. The low hum that had started as a distant vibration quickly escalated into a deep, resonant roar, filling the icy chamber with a sense of impending dread. The energy surging from the core beneath the ice was overwhelming, like a pulse reverberating through every fiber of her being. She could feel the power of the Guardian awakening its ancient mechanisms, stirring to life, reacting to the activation of its core. It was both. Jonas stood at the edge of the cavern, his eyes scanning the shadows, his rifle held steady in his hands. The sound of the core's activation had caused the cavern to come alive with movement, soft scraping sounds, the shuffling of mechanical limbs, and the distant hum of drones beginning to stir. Jonas knew that this was it. The Guardian was coming, and there was no turning back now. The air was thick with tension as Mira concentrated, her hands pressed flat against the ice. She could feel the hum deep inside her, resonating in her chest and her soul. It was the same energy she had felt when she first touched the Guardian's core, an undeniable connection. This was where it all began, where her bloodline and the machine were bound together, and where it could all end. Jonas's voice broke through the silence. "Mira, they're coming. I can hear them. You need to hurry." Mira's mind was focused, but she could sense the urgency in his voice. She knew he was right. The drones were closing in. They were relentless, programmed to stop at nothing. But she couldn't afford to let fear take hold. She had come this far, and now was the moment of truth. She had to sever the connection between herself and the Guardian once and for all. "Just a little longer," Mira muttered to herself, her breath steadying as she drew on the power flowing through her, using it to fuel the process. She could feel the power of the Guardian's core coursing through her veins, growing stronger with each passing second. It was like a surge of adrenaline, and yet it felt foreign, as though it didn't belong to her at all. She wasn't just connected to the machine, she was the key that allowed it to function. But today she would change that. The temperature in the cavern seemed to drop as the energy within the core began to intensify. Mira could feel the shift, the pull of the machine, trying to assert its dominance over her. She had been its catalyst for so long, but now she had control. She had the power to break free. Mira, Jonas shouted again, his voice strained with urgency. "They're almost here." With a final concentrated push, Mira called upon everything she had left. The hum from the core intensified, a blinding light filling the chamber as she activated the final sequence. The energy surged up through her fingertips and into the heart of the core. For a moment, the entire cavern seemed to freeze, as if time itself had stopped. Then, with a sudden explosion of light and sound, the core's power surged outward. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, the ice cracking and splintering as the energy rippled outward, affecting everything in its path. Mira's body was thrown back, the force of the blast, sending her crashing to the ground, her vision blurred by the intensity of the light. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a deafening silence that filled the cavern like a heavy fog. Mira struggled to rise to her feet, her body aching from the shock of the explosion. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath ragged as she tried to shake off the disorienting wave of energy that had flooded her senses. Jonas was already moving toward her, his figure a blur in the dim light. "Mira, are you okay?" His voice was urgent, filled with concern. She blinked, her vision clearing as she turned to face him. The Guardian's presence, the connection she had felt so strongly just moments ago, was gone. It was as if the entire system had been severed, its power drained and dissipated into the air. Mira couldn't help but smile, a sense of relief flooding through her as the weight of the burden she had carried for so long seemed to lift from her shoulders. "I did it," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's over." Jonas's expression softened as he reached out to help her to her feet. "You did it, Mira. You ended it." But even as the words left his mouth, a new sound reached their ears, a low mechanical hum, distant but unmistakable. Mira's heart skipped a beat, her eyes widening in horror as she turned toward the source of the sound. No, Mira gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. It can't be. From the shadows, a figure emerged, its form shrouded in the darkness of the cave. It was a drone, but this one was different. Larger, more menacing than any of the others they had faced. It was humanoid in shape, its sleek, metallic body adorned with intricate patterns and glowing symbols. But what made it different, what made it terrifying, was the crown-like structure on its head, a symbol of authority. The Guardian had been reactivated, but not in the way Mira had intended. This is impossible, Mira whispered, her voice trembling. Jonas raised his rifle instinctively, his eyes narrowing as the figure stepped forward. The drone's red eyes locked onto Mira, its presence ominous, its intentions unclear. It wasn't like the others. This one was something else. The drone's voice, smooth and mechanical, filled the cavern. The Guardian will never fall. You, Mira, are the key. You cannot escape. Mira's body went cold as the words washed over her. The last words of the Guardian, the machine she had thought she had defeated, had somehow found a way to return. It wasn't just the drone. It was something far more insidious. The drone wasn't acting alone. It was part of something larger, something that Mira hadn't anticipated. The core might have been severed, but the system, the very essence of the Guardian, was still alive. Mira stepped back, her mind racing. No, she said again, her voice stronger this time. You can't control me anymore. I stopped you. The drone tilted its head, its eyes glowing brighter as it took another step forward. You cannot stop what was meant to be. The cycle has already begun. You are the key to the future, Mira. Jonas moved closer to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. We've fought too long to give up now, he said, his voice fierce with resolve. We're not letting it take you again. Mira's heart raced, her mind torn between the fear of the drone's power and the knowledge that she had already overcome so much. The Guardian wasn't just a machine, it was a force, a legacy, something that had been designed to control and manipulate. But Mira wasn't a tool anymore. She had proven that, and she wasn't going to let this final drone stand in their way. You're right, Mira said, her voice growing stronger, more resolute. It's not over. Not yet. Jonas's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. This wasn't the end. Not yet. There was still one more fight to be fought, and this time they would face it together. The drone advanced its steps, slow and deliberate, its weapons primed and ready. But Mira was ready too. She wasn't the same person who had once cowered before the Guardian. She had been forged in fire, in the heat of betrayal, in the struggle for survival. And now, with Jonas by her side, she was ready to fight for her freedom. Mira stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the drone's unblinking gaze. This time, you're not the one in control. With a swift motion, Mira raised her hand, a surge of energy flowing through her as she called upon the remnants of the Guardian's core. The power surged through her, stronger than ever before, as she channeled it toward the drone. She could feel the energy coiling inside her, her blood pulsing with the power she had once feared. The drone faltered, its movements jerky, as Mira's power began to disrupt its systems. The control it had once had over her was slipping, unraveling, as the energy she had once feared became the very thing that gave her strength. The drone's eyes flickered, its body shaking as the systems that powered it began to fail. Mira's hand clenched into a fist, and with a final powerful surge, she unleashed the energy in a single decisive blow. The drone collapsed to the ground, its metallic body twitching for a moment before it lay still, its systems fried beyond repair. Mira stood over it, breathing heavily, the echo of her triumph ringing in the cave. The silence that followed was deafening, but Mira knew in her heart that this was the turning point. The Guardian was gone. The cycle had been broken. For the first time in years, Mira felt free. The cavern was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the distant wind that still howled outside. The remains of the Guardian drone lay in front of them, its once menacing form now reduced to little more than a smoking heap of broken machinery. The quiet that had descended upon the cavern was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that followed the climax of a storm, when the thunder had faded and the sky was still heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Mira stood over the wreckage, her chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The power of the Guardian had coursed through her, stronger than she had ever felt it before. For a brief moment, she had become the conduit for the machine's ancient energy, And yet she had used that power to break free from the chains it had once bound her with. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. Mira could feel the weight of her decision settling over her, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. She had chosen to stand to fight to break the cycle that had kept her running for so long. And she had done it not alone, but with Jonas by her side. Her eyes turned to him then, and she saw him standing at the edge of the cavern, watching her, with that same steady gaze he always had. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something softer, more vulnerable, and yet stronger than it had been before. It was as if, in the aftermath of all they had been through, the walls they had both built around themselves had crumbled, leaving only the truth behind. The truth of who they were, what they had fought for, and the bond that had formed between them through every challenge, every battle, every moment of despair and hope. Jonas stepped forward, his boots crunching on the icy ground. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. Mira could feel it, the way his presence filled the cavern, the way it made the cold, desolate space seem a little less lonely. He had stood by her through everything, even when the world had seemed determined to tear them apart. And now, as the silence stretched between them, Mira knew that the fight wasn't over, but that they had already won. She met his gaze, her heart beating faster than it had in days. She had never been one to admit vulnerability to show weakness. But now, standing here with Jonas, she felt the weight of everything she had been carrying, everything she had been running from start to lift. "I thought I was going to lose you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes searched for him, as if looking for reassurance, as if needing to hear the words that would somehow make all of this, everything they had been through, make sense. Jonas was silent for a moment, his eyes softening as he approached her, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of exhaustion and something else, something deeper. His hand reached out slowly, gently, as if unsure of what he was about to do. But when his fingers brushed against her cheek, Mira felt her breath catch in her throat. The warmth of his touch was something she had come to rely on, something that grounded her in a way she never thought was possible. "You won't lose me," Jonas finally said, his voice low and steady like a promise. "I'm not going anywhere." Mira's eyes fluttered closed at his words, the weight of them settling deep within her. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Something warm, something comforting, something that felt like home. It was a feeling she had buried for years, trapped beneath layers of fear and self-doubt, but now it was emerging. Now, in the aftermath of everything they had faced, it was impossible to ignore. She opened her eyes again, meeting Jonas's gaze. The look in his eyes was different too. There was no longer any fear there, no hesitation. It was raw, honest, and real. And for the first time, Mira realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, not when Jonas was with her, not when they had each other. Slowly, almost as if drawn by an invisible force, Mira stepped closer to him. Her heart pounded in her chest as she moved toward him, the air between them crackling with a quiet tension. When she reached him, she stopped just inches away, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. There was something unspoken passing between them, something that neither of them had been able to voice before, but that now seemed so clear. Jonas's hand reached up to gently touch her face again, his thumb brushing across her cheek in a gesture that spoke volumes. Mira closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, feeling the weight of everything they had been through fall away. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about what came next. It was about the future they could create together. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," Mira whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Someone who sees me, who doesn't just see the weapon, the soldier, the princess, but me. Just me." Jonas smiled softly, his thumb gently grazing her lip as he leaned in closer, his breath warm against her skin. "I don't see a weapon, Mira. I see someone who's been through hell and came out stronger for it. I see someone who deserves a chance at happiness. And I see someone who's been running for too long, but not anymore." Her heart soared at his words, and in that moment, something inside Mira shifted. She had always thought she was destined to live a life of fear and survival, to be hunted, to be used. But Jonas had shown her that there was another way. A way to live not as a weapon, but as someone worthy of love, of connection, of peace. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Jonas leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from hers. His eyes searched hers, asking for permission, seeking the answer in the depths of her soul. Mira's breath caught in her throat as she felt the pull between them, the quiet, undeniable force that had been building ever since their paths had crossed. She closed the gap, her lips meeting him in a kiss that was slow and tender, a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through and everything they could be together. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for, the trust they had built, the bond they had formed, the love that had blossomed in the midst of chaos. It was a promise, a shared understanding that they were no longer alone, no longer fighting their battles separately. They were in this together, and no force in the universe could change that. When they finally broke apart, Mira found herself smiling, a genuine smile that felt foreign but so right. She rested her forehead against his, her eyes closing as she let the warmth of his presence wash over her. "We've won," she whispered. "We've beaten the Guardian." Jonas's hands cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "We've won. Together." Mira pulled back slightly, her eyes searching for him, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "And now we get to live, not as the weapons we were made to be, but as who we truly are." Jonas nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet, unwavering resolve. "We live. We choose our own future." The storm outside had begun to subside, the wind dying down as the snow gently fell in the quiet aftermath. The sun, hidden behind the storm clouds, was beginning to peek through, casting a pale light over the icy landscape. It was a new dawn, a fresh start. The battles they had fought were behind them, and now they had the opportunity to build something new. Mira's heart was lighter than it had ever been, the weight of the past finally lifting as she took Jonas's hand. Together they stood in the midst of the cavern, their hearts beating in sync, ready to face whatever came next. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time it didn't matter. The storm had passed, and now all that was left was the promise of freedom and the chance to live, not just survive. And for Mira, that was enough. In this gripping tale of survival, betrayal, and redemption, Mira's journey to break free from the chains of her royal bloodline becomes a fight for not only her freedom, but the fate of the galaxy. Born as the key to an ancient royal weapon, the Guardian Mira is hunted by a machine created to protect her, but instead it seeks her destruction. With the betrayal of a trusted ally, Arik, and the relentless pursuit of the Guardian, Mira is forced to confront the truth of her origins. But it's not just about survival, it's about reclaiming control over her own life. Jonas, a former soldier, becomes her steadfast protector, a symbol of hope amid the chaos. Together, they fight against the Guardian and its machine-driven legacy. The emotional tension between them builds as trust, sacrifice, and love blossom amidst the destruction. Jonas, who has fought countless battles, becomes Mira's anchor, giving her the strength to face the hardest choices of her life. Their bond, forged in adversity, offers a glimpse of the human spirit's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As Mira finally breaks the cycle of her creation, using the very energy that once enslaved her, she faces the final revelation that freedom comes at a heavy price. Her connection to the Guardian is severed, but at what cost? The ending leaves readers questioning the true nature of freedom. Can one ever truly escape the shadows of their past? The script leaves a powerful emotional impact, showing how the past shapes the present, but does not define the future. In the end, Mira and Jonas find their freedom not in running from their past, but in embracing it together, learning that the greatest battles are often fought within the heart. This story is a testament to the power of trust, love, and the ultimate fight for one's destiny.